Welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to see how do we create a database, drop a database, and alter the database. Before we go into the demo, we want to understand what is the difference between a database and a table. Database is nothing but collection of several components like tables, indexes, store procedures, and so on. You already know that table is a two-dimensional structure which contains rows and columns. So all the data is containing in tables only. So the table is part of the database. So inside the database only, you are going to create multiple tables. When you create a database, you will get two files generated automatically. One is the file name is .mdf. It is a primary data file where it contains all the data inside it. Another one is .ldf, which is the transaction log file, which contains all the transaction log details. Let's look into the demo. Let's look back to the SQL Server Management Studio. In the Management Studio, let's go to the left-hand side. We have system databases, we have database snapshots, and we have a migration database. So we already know that there are some system default databases has been already created by Microsoft when we are installing SQL Server. Right now, let's create our own database. Right-click on the database, create a new database. When you click on this, what it happens is it's internally issuing a query to create a database in the SQL Server. So let's give the database name as test1. Please note that I have already told you there are two files will be created. One is your MDF file, another is the LDF file. So in this, you go to this path, not the path where it is getting stored. So we go and verify what this how the file looks like, and then click on OK. Now we created a database. Now we're clicking on the database. Click on New Query. Let's go back to the file path that we have already copied. And we'll see that whether the MDF and LDF files has been created. You could see here there are two files has been created. One is MDF file, another one is the LDF file. Let's flip back to the SQL Server Management Studio. Let's create the database using SQL query. The syntax is create database and give the database name, which is sample1. Let's execute this query. Now the database sample1 is being created. Go back to the Object Explorer, click on databases, refresh it. You see that sample1 database being created. Now let's see how to rename the database name that we created currently. Let me use the SQL query itself to rename the database. For renaming the database name, I'm going to use the command alter database. Anything you want to do on alter on the database, use the command alter database. Give the database name sample1. I'm going to modify the name and give it to sample2. So what I'm trying to do here is sample1 database name is being modified to sample2. Let's execute this query. Now look, let's go back to the Object Explorer and refresh it. You see that sample1 has been renamed to sample2. Even in the Object Explorer, right click on the database name. You can be able to rename the database name here itself from sample2 to any other database name, as we do it in the folders renaming in Windows. As we do the folder renaming in Windows. Let's go back to the query. Let's go back to the query window. Let me try to use another variation where we can be able to rename the database by using a system store procedure. Now you might be wondering, what is store procedure? A store procedure is a prepared SQL code that you can save, so the code can be reused over and over again. So a code that is a SQL statement only, let's say you are going to alter database sample1 modify name equal to sample2. This can be put into a store procedure so that we can be able to reuse the store procedure again and again. So in the store procedure, there could be multiple SQL statements can be clubbed together. That is one of the benefit of the store procedure. So let's use the system store procedure. By default, Microsoft gives some system store procedures as they are given as system databases as well. So I'm going to use the store procedure name sp underscore rename DB. I'm going to give the modifying the name, right? So we are going to rename the DB from sample1, comma, to sample2. Let me select this query and execute it. You see that it is not getting executed successfully. It's saying that supply a valid database name. I understand that I already renamed the sample1 to sample2. Now I need to rename sample2 to sample3. Let's do that. Execute it. Now go back to the object. Now go back to the Object Explorer. Refresh it. You see that it is got renamed to sample3. Now let's drop the database. To drop the database, the following command can be used. Drop database and give the name of the database you want to drop it. You can drop the database from the Object Explorer. Right click on the Object Explorer. You can say delete around it. So let's drop the database using SQL query. Let me execute it. Now we are able to drop the database. Now let's look into one more scenario where somebody is accessing this database. Can we able to drop the database? What I mean to say here is, let's say we have two users. One user is accessing the database. The other user, we want to drop the database. Is it possible to drop the database or not? Now, let's create another database to make sure that we test this scenario. Create database. In this case, I want to create the database name as test1. Just execute this command. The command got successfully executed. Now what I will do here is, let me open another SQL Server Management Studio and you can connect to this newly created database test1. I just go to the search SQL Server Management Studio. I click on it. I'm opening another instance. This another instance, what I'm opening, will act as a user 2 and will access the database of test1. Still it is opening. Let me connect to the SQL Server by using the server name local. Let me open the new query window. Now currently this SQL query window, whatever I open, is connected to the master database. You could see here there is a master database got selected. So let's change it to the test1. Use. If you want to change the database name, use the SQL query use test1 and then go. Just run this command. You see here in the drop down, it is getting changed to test1 database. Even you can modify the database here itself in the drop down. Let's go back to the other SQL Server Management Studio and try to drop this database. So at this time, we will drop the database from the Object Explorer. Refresh it first. We see the test1, right click and then delete it. You could see this, we are not able to drop the database as someone is accessing the database. Now, the error message we'll get around is, the database is in use. So let's stop this delete operation. You could see that drop failed for the database test1. So you cannot able to drop this database when someone is accessing it. Then you might be asking a question, how can I drop this database still? So while dropping this database in the SQL Server Management Studio, you see this pop-up, you see the close existing connections. Click on this checkbox. Now you see that you can drop this database. That means you are closing the connection that other user has opened. You're forcing them to get out of this database and then you can be able to drop that database. So in this lecture, we have seen how to create the database, how to rename the database name and how do we drop the database. In the coming lecture, we will see how to create tables under these databases and how do we populate the data inside it.